Good morning, class, and welcome to Public Speaking. My name is Robert, and I will be your instructor for the semester. I would like to begin with some basic introduction material about the class, so I am going to cover 4 main points in this brief lecture. I will begin with an introduction to the field of communication. Next, I will go over the reasons we study communication, followed by the benefits of public speaking. And then I will close the lecture by teaching the influences of technology and social media on our current forms of communication. To begin, let us first define and understand the basic characteristics of communication. The term originates from the Latin word communico, meaning to join or unite, connect, or share. In modern day, the technical definition of communication is the act or process of using words, sounds, signs, and behaviors to express or exchange information, and to express ideas, thoughts, and feelings to someone else. One of the main branches of this field is public speaking, which we will be focusing on during this class. The technical definition for public speaking is defined as an organized, face-to-face, prepared message intended to inform, entertain, or persuade a group of people through verbal and nonverbal delivery. Like many fields of study, communication carries with it certain characteristics. One of the main characteristics to understand is that communication is symbolic, meaning, we use a series of markings, objects, and signs which represent ideas and concepts to help us understand and make sense of the world. These symbols which are chosen are often agreed upon by a group or culture in order to have shared meaning when using them. In our culture, for example, we use the alphabet as a set of symbols which make up our words. Our words make up sentences, sentences to paragraphs, and so on. We also use a series of gestures and nonverbal cues which also are symbolic, which we will discuss later in these lectures. The second characteristic associated with communication is that it is an ongoing process and portions of it change over time. As people interact and societies progress, communication progresses along with it. Certain words, phrases, or gestures may have different meanings over time. Technology also changes the process of communication. If you think back to early in our own culture, much of our communication was done through writing letters, then by telephone, later by the internet, and now mostly by emails or text messages. As we progress, the way we communicate also progresses and changes over time. Lastly, it is characterized by culture, mainly because culture determines what communication looks like and means. Cultural groups tend to share the same worldview and perceptions, which influences their ethics, morals, norms, and rules. Since these directly influence behavior patterns, it affects the way communication is developed in a particular culture, both verbally and nonverbally. Now that we have covered the definitions and characteristics, let us cover the reasons we study this subject. First, communication on a basic level meets our needs in 4 main ways: physically, with our identities, in our relationships, and practically. Our physical needs are met as we learn how to express ourselves, aiding in the release of stress and feelings to better our physical and mental health. Regarding our identity, as we communicate about ourselves and others communicate with us, we discover more of who we are and who others are. When it comes to relationships, knowing how to communicate is connected with making and keeping friendships, starting romantic relationships, and maintaining relationships or sometimes ending them. Lastly, knowing how to communicate properly helps us with your practical daily needs, such as accomplishing our everyday tasks, interacting at our job, or accomplishing our daily goals. Another reason we study this topic is it helps give us new perspectives on how we and others communicate. We learn and observe our strengths and weaknesses, giving us an opportunity to improve where we may be lacking. Third, we also study this subject because we devote much of our time to communication. And since much of your time is dedicated to communicating, it is imperative that we invest into doing it properly to be more effective. We also study because knowing how to do so properly helps us with employment and advancing in our careers. Researching, organizing, and presentations are all connected with the skills of communication, and are often the skills many employers are searching for when hiring possible candidates. We also study this field because it is critical for our own social development as individuals. It aids in our intellectual development as we engage others on a personal level, helps us with our career trajectories and advancements, and teaches us how to have civil engagements in regard to politics, religion, and clearly presenting our own points of view. What we aim for in studying communication is to become competent, understanding how to be appropriate in our behaviors, effective in our interactions, and disciplined in our verbal and nonverbal skills. Looking at the current statistics, it shows that up to 70% of today's job involves some form of public speaking, which coincides with why it is beneficial. Lastly, it has public benefits because it teaches us effective and critical listening skills required to critique and evaluate our own ideas and the ideas of others. This allows us to contribute in creating and sustaining our own cultures and societies by helping us understand public issues, politics, civil dilemmas, and being able to express our own opinions and solutions. Moving on to our last point, I want to cover the influence of technology and social media on the field of communication. I think it is important that we observe technology and social media, not as positive and negative, but as beneficial and consequential. Technology and social media platforms are merely tools. It is what we decide to do with those tools which allows it to be beneficial or consequential to our skills in communication. First, let us begin with technology and how, over time, it has changed the way people communicate. When we think of the early forms of society, it is easy to observe the slowness of communicating as a people. If we desired to communicate with a relative far away, we relied on letters, taking days, weeks, or months for delivery, and the same just for a reply. The same went for current events in our country. If something of importance happened, it would have to be reported, printed in a newspaper, then circulated across the country, which could often take weeks. As technology progressed and the forms of communication became faster, we had the development of the radio, then later the telephone, leading to the first forms of the internet and email. Later, we developed the means to make many of these forms of communication portable, leading to the smartphone. As we have progressed, our communications have become more digitized and portable. All of this leads to benefits and consequences to how we communicate. For instance, let us observe the many benefits of our technological advances in regard to communication. Today, our communication is faster, can be in real time, and in some instances can be deleted or retracted. No longer do we have to wait days, weeks, or months for a conversation to take place. We can do so in real time if we so choose. Or, how about the ease of being able to communicate with our current technological advances? We no longer have to wait at home for a phone call or rely on answering machines for messages. Our phones have become a normal part of most people's attire, and text messages have become easier forms of communication than any answering machine. Or perhaps we can think about who we can communicate with today. Gone are the days when we once had to pay for long-distance phone calls, preventing us from having easy contact with those far from us. We can communicate with nearly anyone, anywhere, at any time if we so choose. And there are many more benefits worth mentioning that we cannot do here. However, this advancement in technology and communication is not without its consequences. Technology, by its very nature, was meant to advance societies and save time. What we have experienced, as an unintended consequence, is that technology now takes and demands more and more of our time. We, as a society, have become so attached to technology we have become dependent on it to function on basic daily tasks. This has led to the interference of communication at a basic level. You can see this firsthand if you go to any restaurant on a busy evening. What is it you observe at many tables where a group of people are sitting? Is it not many, if not all of them, on their phones? Or think about reading a digital message? Does it usually have tone or give clear context? How often have you experienced miscommunication because you had to guess the tone of the message or vice versa? Social media has also had many benefits and consequences, especially as its use becomes a normal way of life. Beneficially, it has become one, if not the main way, many people worldwide connect and communicate with one another. I think about my wife and her family who lives in Brazil. They speak several times a day even though they are worlds apart. Social media has also aided in cross-cultural communication, allowing others to interact and observe in other cultures outside their own. There is also news. Worldwide news can now be covered in real time on almost all social media platforms and make alerts at a local level in real time. Then there is the ability to display yourself and your status to communicate with a large audience. You can communicate with millions of people at once, given your platform. But just like with technology, social media is not without its consequences. One of these huge losses is the ability to communicate at an interpersonal level. Many people rely so much on social media that they have lost the basic skills to communicate face-to-face. For example, a few years ago, the United States Army had an issue on their hands where their new recruits lacked the basic interpersonal communication skills to get through basic training. Meaning, they did not know how to interact and communicate with one another. If you are not aware, this is a major skill needed in basic training because it entails working with other recruits as a team to complete objectives, many in which you are dealing with live fire and weapons. They discovered that many of their recruits were so addicted to video games that their only interaction and communication was through online gaming platforms and not with actual people. They finally decided to implement a program where they could first wean those recruits off of interacting on video games, before allowing them to begin basic training, so that they did not become a danger to themselves and others. Or how about the fact that many people will say something on social media platforms that they would never say in person? It seems anyone can be brave behind a platform, and even have some feelings of self-confidence. But in reality, who they portray themselves to be behind a keyboard is not really who they are in reality. And speaking of reality, how has social media played a part in who people really are? With the ability to make up your own personas and profiles, it becomes a gambling game if you are seeking to communicate with someone you have never met in person. Catfishing has become an issue. Filters to change appearances and enhance characteristics have become the norm. It becomes a risk one must take if they choose to interact with those on social media platforms. And how about cyberbullying? Before social media, it seemed, bullying was relegated more to social gatherings such as school, which seemed to be easier to address when people were present in the same place. But with cyberbullying, how do you address and resolve conflict when people are not in the same place? It seems to become an unresolvable issue unless one is willing to remove themselves from social media platforms. And there are many other issues. Time does not permit us to go over the lifelong digital footprints you leave, or the effects social media has on one's social image or emotional stability. But again, I want to emphasize that technology and social media are not good and bad in themselves so much as they are merely tools. But they carry with them benefits and consequences as we use them to communicate. So, in closing our first lecture, I want to reiterate that communication has certain characteristics and reasons for study, while public speaking, a branch of communication, carries with it many benefits. As we observe communication and public speaking, we want to be aware of the benefits and consequences that technology and social media has had on both fields. And with that, I would like to end with a small quote from Mark Twain. Do the thing you fear the most, and the death of fear is certain. For many of you, public speaking is a great fear, and the only way to overcome that fear is to do that which you do not want to do, give public presentations.